Welcome to another knowledge lesson, everyone. We are going to be learning about another life cycle today. We've talked about a lot of cycles so far. We've talked about the cycle of daytime and nighttime, and the cycle of the seasons. We've talked about a few life cycles, the life cycle of flowering plants, the life cycle of trees, and the life cycle of chickens. We talked about chickens in our last lesson. What is the life cycle of a chicken? Where does it start? The life cycle of a chicken starts with the egg. Once the embryo hatches from the egg, it is a baby chick. The baby chick will then grow up into an adult chicken called a rooster or a hen, and then the hen lays more eggs that have been fertilized by the rooster. So we start with the egg and we end with the egg as well. Today, we are going to learn about the life cycle of another animal that starts with an egg. We will learn about the life cycle of a frog. Before we do, let's go over our vocabulary words. Amphibian. An amphibian is an animal that can live on both land and water. Frogs are amphibians. Lungs. Lungs are a pair of organs that are used to breathe. Sometimes, if you run too hard in the cold weather, it can make your lungs hurt. Gills. Gills are the body parts that some aquatic animals use to breathe underwater. A fish's gills open to take in water. Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is the process by which some young animals change form as they become adults. Burrow. Burrow means to make a hole into or under something. Some animals use their front legs to push dirt aside so they can burrow deeper into the ground. Think about a time when you have tried to burrow into something or when you saw an animal burrow into something. Tell whoever is helping you today about it and try to use the word burrow. Did you know that there are thousands of different kinds of frogs in the world? Frogs don't all look alike either. Frogs can be all different sizes and colors. The smallest frog in the world was recently discovered in Papua New Guinea. It is smaller than a dime. The largest frog in the world is the Goliath frog in Africa. It can grow up to 3 feet long and weigh 7 pounds. Frogs live on every continent in the world except Antarctica. Why do you think they don't live in Antarctica? Frogs don't live there because it is too cold, although there is a frog that lives just inside the Arctic Circle. Do you know what the name for a group of frogs is? A group of frogs is called an army. Now that we know some cool facts about frogs, let's find out about their life cycles. Just like a chicken, a frog's life cycle includes birth, growth, reproduction, and death. The reproduction stage creates new life so that the cycle repeats over and over again. Have you ever stood at the edge of a pond or a stream in the spring and spotted a jelly-like substance floating in the water? If so, you have seen the first stage of a frog's life cycle. The first stage of a frog's life cycle is the egg. That jelly-like substance is frog spawn, which is hundreds of soft, jelly-like eggs. In the center of each egg is a tiny black dot. Each black dot is a tiny embryo that will become a tadpole soon. A developing young frog is called an embryo at the early stages, and a tadpole at the later stages. We've heard the word embryo before. We know that the inside of a tree seed is called an embryo, and that a growing baby chick is called an embryo as it grows inside the egg. The mother frog lays her eggs in water in spring when the cold winter months are over and the water is warm enough for her eggs to survive. The mother frog lays hundreds of eggs at one time. Female frogs lay hundreds of eggs at one time because not all of the eggs survive. Unlike hens, frogs do not usually stay with their eggs, so fish, birds, and water insects are more likely to eat some of the eggs. Some of the eggs will survive and eventually develop into tadpoles. Just as a developing chick is nourished by the yolk of an egg as it grows, a developing frog is also nourished by yolk-like material in the egg. Within a few days or weeks of its development, depending on the type of frog, the embryo develops into a tadpole with a head and tail. Soon after that, when its gills are formed, it is ready to hatch out of the egg. Gills allow the tadpole to breathe underwater. Fish have gills also. People cannot breathe underwater because people do not have gills. Instead, we hold our breath when we go underwater. Once it hatches, a tadpole lives in water. A tadpole has a long, flat tail that it uses to swim. Its gills allow it to get oxygen from the water. Tadpoles swim about in search of food. Although they still feed from the leftovers of the eggs, they also search for small, green water plants. Tadpoles grow very quickly, especially in warm water. After some time, the tadpole begins its transformation into a frog. When a living thing undergoes a huge change in shape, this process is called metamorphosis. Tadpoles change quite dramatically from fish-like creatures with gills into four-legged land creatures with lungs. Frogs can breathe air because they have lungs, just like people. Lungs are the body parts that we use to breathe air. Let's find out more about this remarkable transformation. After the appearance of the head and the tail, the tadpole grows back legs. Gradually, lungs develop inside its body, and its gills begin to disappear inside its body. Because it has lungs, the tadpole can now breathe air. Next, front legs begin to grow. As a tadpole's legs grow, its tail gets smaller. The tadpole uses its tail and its legs to swim through the water. It also begins to use its legs to climb onto plants in the water. Gradually, the tadpole's legs grow longer, and its tail disappears completely. At this stage, the tadpole is a young frog that can leave its watery home and use its lungs to breathe. For many types of frogs, all of this has happened in about 12 weeks. At this stage of its development, the young frog is about an inch long. That's roughly the size of your thumb. Very young frogs are often called froglets. Young frogs leave the pond to find other tasty treats to eat on land. They do not go too far away from their watery home, though. On land, they search for small insects, worms, and slugs. They catch their food with their long, sticky tongues. They have to be very careful, though, as lots of animals, such as snakes, lizards, and birds, eat young frogs. Do you know what you call an animal that can live in water and on land? An animal that can live in water and on the land is called an amphibian. Frogs are amphibians. Although frogs spend a lot of time on land, they stay fairly close to water. Frogs need to keep their skin damp or somewhat wet. Instead of drinking water, they absorb it through their skin. Frogs breathe through their skin when they are in water, but they breathe through their lungs when they are on land. They also seek out water when they want to cool down. If there is no water nearby, they sit in the shade. They sit in the sun when they want to warm up. In the winter, many frogs hibernate. Often they burrow or dig a hole in mud at the bottom of ponds. If they can't find a pond, they seek out a damp place, such as a pile of logs, in which to spend the winter. The young frog has to survive until it is 2 or 3 years old to become a parent. To live that long, frogs have various survival techniques. a survival technique, is a way of staying alive. Their skin is often the color of their natural habitat. This helps them to blend into the background and avoid hungry predators. This is a form of camouflage. Frogs can hop quickly out of reach. They are also excellent swimmers. They can jump into the nearest pond or river to avoid danger. Some frogs have poisonous skin to protect them from predators. All frogs have large, bulging eyes. This helps them to more easily find their own food and avoid becoming dinner for some other creature. When a frog is between 2 and 3 years old, it will return to the pond where it was born. At this stage, the frog is now considered an adult. In spring, male frogs croak loudly to let the females know they are ready to mate. As with chickens, the eggs must be fertilized by a male frog, or else they will not develop into baby frogs. And so the life cycle begins all over again. Each spring, a jelly-like substance appears in ponds and rivers. It is frog spawn, or hundreds of small eggs containing tiny embryos. Frog spawn is a compound word. If spawn means eggs, what does frog spawn mean? It means frog eggs. In time, many will hatch into tadpoles, and a little while later, these tadpoles will turn into frogs that will live for 7 years or more. It is amazing that frogs change their appearance so dramatically throughout their life cycle, from egg to tadpole to adult. Next, we will learn about the incredible transformation in another creature's life cycle. Stay tuned.
All right, we have just learned about the life cycle of a frog, and I have some questions for you about that life cycle. My first question is, how do tadpoles breathe underwater? How are they able to breathe underwater? You've got it. Tadpoles are like fish. They have what's called gills that help them breathe underwater. Are tadpoles affected by the cycle of the seasons? We know that trees are. What about tadpoles? Are tadpoles affected by the changing of the seasons? Yes, they are, huh? How are they affected? Frogs, like bears, hibernate for the winter. As tadpoles, they burrow in the mud to stay warm for the long winter months, and then when spring comes around, they come out. What is it called when a living thing undergoes a huge change in shape and appearance, like the frog does, from a tadpole all the way to an adult? What do we call that? We call that process metamorphosis. I want you to turn to whoever is helping you today, and I want you to ask them a question about what we learned that starts with the word what. See if they can answer it. If they can't answer your question, then you get to be the teacher for a little while and answer it for them, explain it to them. When you are finished with that conversation with whoever is helping you today, go ahead and open up the PDF that is attached to this assignment. I'm going to jump on my computer so I can show you what we'll be doing on our assignment today. In this video, we'll see a time lapse of frog eggs turning into tadpoles. Let's see what that looks like. This is the frog spawn, or the jelly-like substance that's actually hundreds of eggs, those tiny black embryos. You can see them moving around inside the eggs a little bit.
of them are starting to grow and turn into tadpoles. And the tadpoles are swimming away from their eggs. Those tadpoles will later grow up and become frogs. Today, we are going to talk about the life cycle of a frog. We are going to write an informational paragraph. Go ahead and get the PDF that's attached to this assignment open in Kami. It should look like this. Here we have a planning guide for our informational paragraph about the life cycle of a frog. Remember, a paragraph is a group of sentences about one subject. When authors are writing, they'll usually split their writing into paragraphs to make it easier to read. We're only going to write one paragraph today about the life cycle of a frog. Our introductory sentence, the job of an introductory sentence, is to tell the reader what our paragraph is going to be about. Our paragraph, your introductory sentence, should explain to your audience that you will be telling them about the life cycle of a frog. I'm going to say in my introductory sentence, the life cycle of a frog moves from egg to egg. I'm also going to say there are 4 stages in the life cycle of a frog. Oops. There we go. Our next couple of sentences say first, next, then, and finally. Words like this help us organize our writing in a way that makes sense in chronological order or in the order that it happens. There are 4 stages in the life cycle of a frog, and there are 4 sentences. Our first one will be about the first stage in the life cycle of a frog, our second, third, and fourth stage. What's the first stage in the life cycle of a frog? It goes from egg to egg. So the very first thing that happens is that an adult frog lays eggs, or frog spawn, in a pond. When do frogs lay eggs? Do they lay eggs in the winter when it's cold? No, they lay eggs in the spring. What happens next in the life cycle of a frog? Our next step, I'm not going to write complete sentences on these ones. I'm going to just do a couple of short phrases or words to help you remember when you are writing complete sentences. All of your sentences will need to be complete sentences. The next thing that happens is tadpoles hatch from the eggs. Then the tadpoles start to grow legs and they become young frogs or froglets. And finally, the frogs become adults. What do adult frogs do? They continue the life cycle of a frog. They start the cycle over again by laying more eggs. Remember, mine are not all complete sentences. Yours will need to be complete sentences on each one. I'm just doing a couple sentences or phrases to help you when you are writing your complete sentences. Our conclusion, our concluding sentence, should finish what we're talking about and wrap up the paragraph. So I'm going to say, when the adults lay more eggs, the life cycle of a frog begins all over again. Remember, cycles happen in circles, or it's a sequence of events that happens over and over again. All right, my friends, when you are finished with your informational paragraph about the life cycle of a frog, go ahead and turn it in, and you are all finished for today.